Michael Tellinger, all the way from South Africa, Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania. So, what can you tell the listeners to expect? Maybe just a little taste of tomorrow's lecture at Damon's Restaurant in State College.
Well, I think a point of departure would be to start by explaining that what we believe to be human history and the history of our planet is of vast difference to what most people have been taught, what we've been taught in our history books at school and at university. When you start researching the origins of humankind and the history, which you could probably call the hidden history of our planet and humanity, very quickly you realize that things are not as they seem, and that there's a lot of information that for some reason has been kept out of history books and mainstream of information. And you start finding and discovering things that are quite shocking at first. And eventually you realize that this body of information that is missing from our history books grows and grows and grows to the point that is a lot bigger and a lot more complex than you ever possibly imagined. And it just really shouts and screams at you for more investigation and keeping an open mind at all time, because there are times when you come across interesting information that really goes and flies against everything, every ounce of sanity or logic in your body, and things that we've been told is so that are not necessarily so. And it gets really interesting.
So do you feel that science, religion, and technology are now finally going to come together to solve some of the mysteries that have eluded much of our current civilization for decades?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's really interesting to see how science, especially the field of quantum physics, is pointing very strongly towards the direction of a divine creator, of a divine being, of God, call it whatever you want, and is actually suddenly providing very strong support for such an existence, while science for many decades has been used as cold-hearted, attack on religious belief systems and the existence of some sort of divine intelligence or God. It's, again, I'm always very careful how I say these things, because when you say the word God, in some circles it's interpreted one way, and in other circles it's interpreted a different way. But science and religion and ancient civilizations suddenly start merging. And this is what I found, is that this research that you start doing, or you find when you start researching origins of humankind and ancient civilizations, these lines start to cross, and they start to blur right across, and this is really very exciting. And the discoveries we've been making that you mentioned, of these ancient civilizations in Southern Africa, begin to answer many of these missing years and missing epochs in human history.
Wonderful. Okay, it's almost 20 till 5, and typically halfway around the hour there we take some callers, so we're going to do that now. I know we're a little bit late, but we're going to open up the phone lines now. If you have any questions for Michael, or if you have any thoughts you would like addressed, give us a call at 1-718-664-9323. And Michael, could you tell the listeners what your website is and what they can expect to see on your website?
Well, the main website is slavespecies.com, and just there you'll find a bit of introduction about what I've been doing, what my main body of work and research is, and then also ZuluPlanet.com, that's ZULU or ZULU as you would call it, .com, ZuluPlanet.com, and really what I deal with is my latest book called Temples of the African Gods, which presents the physical evidence of this vanished civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa up to about 300,000 years ago, or starting around 300,000 years ago. And this is where it really becomes interesting, because when you start mentioning those kind of terms and those kind of periods, most archaeologists and historians just go, what are you talking about? Well, that's exactly what it is. We're now finally finding the physical proof and the physical evidence that many authors and many researchers have been writing about and alluding to for decades, about this ancient civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa, mining gold. And we now finally have the physical proof to substantiate and give credibility to many of the authors, especially people like Zechariah Sitchin, obviously the author of, he's written about 12 books now that talk about mostly the translations of the Sumerian tablets and demystifying much of so-called mythology that until now has been thought to be imaginary or mystical or something like that, but it's actually none of that. And the evidence we're finding is the physical proof for this vanished civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa, mining gold as far back as 300,000 years ago.
Okay. So if you're calling through Blog Talk, the number to call in is 1-718-664-9323. Locally, the number is area code 814-342-0479. If you have any questions for Michael, please call in. In the meantime, Michael, I'm sure there's some listeners out there that have a question such as, how are findings in South Africa relevant to the rest of the world?
Well, that's a very important question, and the immediate answer to that is that forever people around the world have been told that nothing of any substance or consequences ever come out of southern Africa. Well, now we're discovering that nothing can be further from the truth, that in fact the evidence that we've now been presented with, that we've discovered, shows us very clearly that every other ancient civilization, and I mean all the so-called great northern hemisphere civilizations like the Egyptians and the Sumerians, which we've been told was the first civilization on Earth. The Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Mayas, the Incas, all of them have got their roots and originally started out in southern Africa. That seems to be the prototype civilization that predates all these other civilizations by many, many thousands of years, and go back to before the flood, what we refer to as the biblical flood, which most, if not all, ancient cultures talk about, this so-called event, this deluge of a flood that the Sumerian tablets describe very, very clearly. And so this vanished civilization, the tip of southern Africa, shows us and has presented us with startling evidence that all the other civilizations actually got their knowledge from this vanished civilization down in the south of Africa.
So what is your take on the thought of Atlantis?
Well, Atlantis is a very interesting thing. The subject of Atlantis is a very interesting subject that is many people have studied for long periods of time, and just like every other so-called mythological story, Atlantis is proving to be more and more of a real historic event. And at this point, I must tell your listeners that just redefine the word mythology, because this is where a lot of people get confused. The original meaning of the Greek word mythos, where the word mythology comes from, the original meaning actually means spoken words, written words of antiquity that were sworn to be accurate and true by priests and kings. So you see very quickly that the meaning we ascribe to the word mythology today is the complete antithesis of its original meaning. It certainly did not mean imaginary or fairy tale. And when you read ancient scripts of the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Romans and Phoenicians, they certainly didn't speak about mythological gods. They speak about their gods. And the body of evidence that we get from the Sumerian tablets presents that. And it's a very interesting journey that you go on when you realize that everything that you read in the Bible is actually what all the major stories in the Bible, from the creation of heaven and earth, the creation of Adam, the creation of Eve from Adam's rib, the flood, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Tower of Babel, and so forth. All these stories have their origins in the Sumerian tablets. And then they get sort of, in a sense, watered down in the Bible, where you can read in much greater detail about what was going down a long time ago. And the Sumerians talk about a time before time, when the gods were on earth and created the earthlings. And until recently, all this stuff has just been shoved under the carpet by historians because it was deemed to be mythological. But, you've got to just put the brakes on right there and say, well, does this mean that all ancient civilizations, because we can't understand what they meant, do we now automatically assume that they just imagined the entire history? Well, it obviously can't be so. And therefore, now, the moment you read the word mythology, you must replace it with its original meaning, which means history. And the moment you do that, you change everything we've ever believed about our human history.
Great. So Michael will be speaking at Damon's Restaurant in State College tomorrow evening from 6 to 9 p.m. And if you'd like to purchase a ticket, you could either check out his website, again, at www.slavedspecies.com, or you could pick up the tickets right at the door at Damon's Restaurant. And again, that'll be tomorrow evening from 6 to 9 p.m. We're taking callers now. The number locally is area code 814-342-0479. And if you're calling through Blog Talk Radio, it's 718-664-9323. So, the next question I have for you, Michael, is, do you feel that we are on the cusp of catapulting humanity into the next phase of evolution?
You're really throwing them at me.
Well, considering what's all going on in human history, it's almost like there's a build-up at one particular place and space and time in human history, and we are all like, we all have this feeling almost about us that something's going to happen. Like, is there going to be a transition? Is there going to be a shift? Is there, all these technologies that have been mythological going to come out all of a sudden? What do you think is going to happen here in the next couple of years with 2012 and all the other theories and speculation that's going on around?
The short answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Yes to all of the above. Except now we got to decode what it is that we mean by that, and what are the potential things that may happen. What is realistic from a scientific perspective? What's happening from a paranormal perspective or metaphysical perspective, and what are the psychics telling us, and what are the scientists telling us, and so forth. And you'll see very quickly, and what are the ancient civilizations telling us in their scriptures and their writings, and what does the Bible tell us, and stuff like that. And as in a strange way, they all converge, and they all seem to be speaking about this particular time. It's like this weird prophecy is fulfilling itself as we move towards this enigmatic 2012, period. Well, first of all, you need to, start by looking at what is this 2012 thing all about. Well, the fact that ancient civilizations knew about these giant 26,000-year epochs and cycles in the rise and fall of civilizations, the fact that they knew about such long periods of time clearly tells us that they understood the passage of time, and they couldn't just suck that out of their thumb. So they must have gotten that information from somewhere, because we're rediscovering that these epochs really do exist, and it's not just something that somebody made up. And we read about the Mayas are obviously famous for it, the Hindus and the Vedas are famous for it, and we realize that these ancient civilizations and cultures knew a lot more than we've known until very recent times. And we are very rapidly rediscovering what they've been trying to tell us about for a long time, hidden and encoded in the ancient scriptures. And once you become comfortable with that, then everything else sort of falls into place. It's just our upbringing and our arrogance and our ego believing that we're the pinnacle of civilization because we got cell phones and stuff like that. It's just ludicrous. And we've lost touch with who we are as a species, lost in this giant universe. But once you become comfortable with the fact that these ancients knew all this stuff, it's a lot easier to digest and to come to terms with the fact that we are rediscovering who we are as a species, and why we're here, and what is really going on out in the universe, and the fact that we're coming out of our slumber, and that there's this very rapid rise of consciousness that is spreading through the world. And this consciousness is a very dangerous word, because it's a tricky word to deal with, and many people have tried to define it, and they seem to fail all the time. So I'm not going to do that either. I'll just rather leave it for people to try and plug into that themselves and try and absorb that. But what becomes very evident is that the ancient civilizations had a very acute knowledge of advanced technology. And when I say advanced technology, I don't mean cell phones and computer chips and so forth. They understood the laws of nature. And this becomes painfully clear when you start decoding the ancient ruins and the ancient civilizations of Southern Africa. These guys were way ahead of the pack. And as I said, they really understood the laws of nature. Now, we have the laws of physics and the laws of science, which is just man's very bad attempts to try and define the laws of nature. And for people out there that think that scientists have got it all figured out, forget it, buddy. You're on the wrong track. Science hasn't even come close to figuring out the laws of nature. And ask any scientists or any nuclear physicists or any quantum physicists what it is that they've actually got figured out, and they'll tell you very quickly, well, we actually know very little, because at least 90% of the stuff that we observe in the laboratory we cannot explain. And that just shows you how completely behind the times we are in our understanding of the laws of nature, which these ancient civilizations had really, they've really embraced it and they understood it. And we see it in the artifacts and the structures that we are finding. And that's really spectacular. So, yes, I believe there's a rapid rise of consciousness. It can be directly linked to many celestial events. We now know that there's this primordial creative source and a light and a frequency and an energy that comes from the galactic center. This has been measured scientifically and shows to be an unstoppable creative force that just spews forth light and life. And it just creates life wherever life will allow to start. And that's incredible new information that we get. And people that follow the work of Dan Burish and oh my God, I forget the guy's name now. It'll come to me now. David Wilcock and Dan Burish. You'll be familiar with this information, and it's just incredible that it seems to be that this light, well, the Russians showed this, they call it the chromosome effect, the fact that this light, that, as we all know by now, that light is a carrier of information. And this light that comes from the galactic center actually is activating our DNA. It's probably stimulating a lot of parts of our DNA that was previously been dormant, which creates a whole feedback mechanism. It re-stimulates our pineal gland, which is really our third eye, which is another thing that the ancient civilizations knew about. And you've suddenly got this wide awakening that's happening to millions of people on a daily basis around the world. While this is happening, I guess there's a lot of craziness going on, because people are waking up and they're suddenly hearing things and they're seeing things they couldn't hear and see before, because their third eye or their pineal gland is being reopened, reactivated. And they go to their priest. Their priest says, oh, well, you might be possessed by the devil. And then they go see the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist says, oh, my God, you are possessed by the devil. And they start giving them, tablets for shrinking their head, closing their pineal gland, and they deny themselves of this beautiful moment in human history where we're waking up and plugging into the knowledge of the universe by shutting down the senses with psychotropic drugs.
Right. What would you say to people out there that still believe that we're alone in the universe?
I'd say wake up, smell the coffee, and just open your eyes. It's those days are way gone. If you believe that we're still alone in the universe, you're living in la la land, and you might as well say Father Christmas does exist, and insist on that. It's as ludicrous as that.
Right.
Sorry. That is a short and simple answer.
Right. With so many disciplines that are converging and overlapping with the information, and that's basically what the show is about. We get different walks of life, different professions, different disciplines on the show to speak their truth or their piece to the puzzle. Once you take all this information in and you discern what's good and what's bad, if you will, you have to raise an eyebrow and say, wow, this is the real deal here. This is actual evidence. In your line of work, what evidence, as a teaser, could you say that you found recently at Adam's Calendar that's actually measurable information that is a fact that nobody can dispute?
Oh, there's so much, Joe. There's just so much evidence. Well, first of all, the tools and the artifacts that we're finding that are hundreds of thousands of years old. And the reason we know this is because of this thing called patina. Patina is like the skin of the rock that grows really slowly. You can call it the skin of the rock for want of a better word. And somebody shaped and molded these tools and implements and artifacts at some point in time. And by the level of growth of the patina, which is several millimeters thick, sometimes a centimeter thick, which is just less than half an inch thick, you realize that these tools and these artifacts are really very, very old. And secondly, the measurements of energy, and this is where it becomes really interesting. So for those people that are going to come to the presentation tomorrow, it's between 6 and 9. Tomorrow, what date is tomorrow? Tomorrow is Saturday, right? Yeah, so it's Saturday, 29. Yeah. I'll present all this information, obviously, and the evidence is presented in great splendor. That's what the presentation is really all about, to show the information and the evidence. And then the fact that we've got alignments with solstices and equinoxes that do not match the current alignments of planet Earth with north, south, east, west, which suggests they were built at a different time. 28th, so it's 28th. Tomorrow is the 28th.
Right.
Saturday the 28th.
That's right. I'm sitting here thinking, no, wait a minute. I did lose some time because I had an interview. Somebody interviewed me last night from 12 to 1, and you haven't had a lot of sleep. There's a 6-hour difference from Southern Africa to here. And I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. I think it's the 28th.
Yeah. All right. So
just to be straight, we know what we're talking about, you people.
Yeah. You better believe every word we say. Right? And the evidence is spectacular. And then the most important thing is, I keep talking about the fact that they had advanced knowledge of technology. And what this all points to is really what people like Nikola Tesla and people have rediscovered in more recent times is this thing called free energy. And that is what I'll be presenting to the people that come to the presentation, is the evidence of this, which is just so spectacular that it truly blows the mind of anyone that first comes face to face with it. And what I find exciting about this is you start seeing this, as I mentioned earlier, this weird kind of prophecy, like as above, so below, as within, so without, and the end days will be as the first days. Well, we now know that the first days, these guys understood and embraced advanced technology, and I mean advanced technology of levitation and of utilizing frequency and sound as a source of energy. And by rediscovering these ancient civilizations, we are starting to rediscover what they knew, and I believe very quickly we're going to be able to plug into that and implement the same understanding of this levels of this free energy that's around us everywhere, that we've been denied of for so long.
Yes. It's funny, as we're sitting here talking, I had a moment of deja vu. With what you said, I knew exactly with the question I asked, I knew what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, and it was really weird. I'm just like, oh, this is weird.
Yeah, there was that one moment where space-time and time-space converge.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing that, I'll also touch upon in my presentation because of the work that I'm doing with this brilliant scientist called Willem de Swart in Johannesburg, who's pretty much decoded what Einstein and scientists like that were looking for a long time, the TOE, or the theory of everything. And this concept of space-time and time-space, and how the two converge and cross over from one to the other. And I believe we've pretty much cracked it, and it's an interesting subject that we can also delve into a little bit.
Right. So the type of energy that you're speaking of, is there a different measurement of the energy that's emitted at Adam's Calendar per se? Or is it a frequency per se, or how would you describe it?
Well, it's a frequency. We've measured the frequency. I don't want to give it all away on the radio show. I'm going to keep some ammunition.
Right. But I wanted to give a little bit of a teaser here because people are going to be like, I'd like to know a little bit more about this. What's he really getting into? But now that you see that there's a measurement behind all this, this is cutting edge research that you're actually doing in Southern Africa. You're bringing to the United States. Your first stop was in New York City, which was Was that last night or?
It was last night.
Yeah.
It seems like a week ago, but it was
Yeah,
last
right.
night. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And then of course you're going to be at Damon's Restaurant here tomorrow from 6 to 9 p.m., which is of course the 28th on Saturday. We're losing some time here. Speaking of time, space, time.
Yeah, exactly.
What is time except for created by man?
Yeah.
Right. So here it is. It's around 5 o'clock now, and again we're coming to you live from WPHB 1260 Country Roots from Phillipsburg, and Michael Tellinger, he's coming to you live here in this radio station right here, right now, sitting right across from me, and it's pretty exciting to me. I actually went to New York City to pick him up, which was really crazy for me, as Phillipsburg and Altoona even. I mean, that's too much city for me. I live out in the middle of the boonies, and of course I've been a redneck all my life, so yeah, it was a little bit interesting driving in that type of traffic and taxi cabs that were beeping and honking and giving me dirty looks and things I can't say in the air. But yeah, it was relatively fun. It was an experience.
I'm impressed. You know, I'm really impressed that you managed this, and well done. And thank you.
No, absolutely. It was worth the trip. I mean, we had a heck of a chat on the way back, and you know, it's nice to get to know you. And of course, I'm going to consider you my personal friend from here on out, from South Africa. And every time I talk to somebody, yeah, my buddy is coming in from South Africa. And you know, we've been Skyping each other and talking on the phone for several months. And plus, I've been interviewing you here on this show, starting out here at WPHB 1260 Country Roots, of course. And now we're doing more blog talk. But every time the owner of the company here and radio station, and Dan, our favorite manager here, he allows us to come on and revisit the station. It has this ambiance about it, and I really enjoy coming here. So thank you guys for allowing us on. And you know what? Dan has this funny saying that comes on about the not a first-time caller, but I'm going to allow him to come on here in a second and tell his thing and ask a question to Michael Tellinger while we're waiting for other people to come on. So.
All right, hey there, Joe. Hey, first-time caller, long-time listener here. Mace.
So what's your question there, Mace?
Honestly, I was just, I was sitting there listening to you, and I told Daryl out there, I said, your voice is just, it's awesome. I love it. Mesmerizing, I guess, might be.
Well, thank you. I'll take it as a compliment. Hopefully we'll mesmerize a whole bunch of people to come listen to me tomorrow night.
Well, one of the things that you were talking about had to do with how people are feeling different things now, like how the light from the center of the universe is coming in and sort of re-energizing all of our DNA and all of the characteristics about our species. And like one of the things that to me personally, like really, I honestly feel like I should be larger than I am. Like I feel like I should be, like my skin should, like I feel like it should break out of my skin sometimes, just because it's just the feeling of being who I am. I think there should be a lot more.
Right, and you know what's so funny is different people that have been on the show have said about an ethereal body. We're growing this ethereal body, like an extra liver or an extra organ somewhere that you can't perceive with the five senses, but it's like gravity. Just because you can't perceive it don't mean it's not there. And another thing I'd like to say is, you know, considering we use like 10 to 12% of our brain, what's the rest for? Not to mention that we use 3% of our DNA, and the rest is considered junk. I really don't believe it's junk like the scientists say. I really just don't think anybody knows how to turn it off and on and to manipulate it, if you will, to get rid of disease or, you know, make us the superhumans that we have the potential of being. What do you think, Michael?
Well, yeah, you put your finger on so many subjects. I mean, that one statement we could probably carry on talking for a whole day. But just the junk DNA issue is obviously a huge problem for us as a species, because it just doesn't make any sense. We seem to use less of our DNA than most species on this planet, and yet we call ourselves the sort of most civilized and the most advanced species on this planet, while we go about wiping it out. And we were talking about that in the car, right? I mean, at which point did we evolve if it's the survival of the fittest? And this flies directly in the face of Darwinian evolution, the survival of the fittest. At which point did we evolve into a species that cannot survive without wearing clothing and protective clothing, and we would die. And it's a very simple consideration.
Yeah, and one other thing to consider is, up until now, the scientists have been scratching their heads saying, there's this missing link. How did humans in the fossil record go from a caveman to current human? And, if you consider these leaps in evolution with a timely frame of mind, if you will, every 12,000 years or it's evolutionary, whatever it is, and these waves of energy come through, and all of a sudden there's a leap in evolution, would that explain the missing link?
I actually believe that the reason why we can't find the missing link is because it was so sudden and just happened so dramatically that there weren't generations and generations with like a half breed where it was like half caveman, half Homo sapien. I believe that it was just at one time, boom, and it took off.
So according to evolution, is that possible? Because it takes millions of years for something to evolve. So how did a leap in evolution, like snap of the fingers, bam, there it is?
Look, this is a very interesting debate, and there are there's a lot of strong support for suggesting that new species evolve very rapidly.
Like spontaneously?
Spontaneously.
Okay.
And this is what Dan Burish's work also shows, that spontaneous life just is created.
With the new advent of some of this new research that's out there with laser light or specific guided light, particularly focused on one particular item, like if you direct a light, laser light in some fashion of a certain magnitude, if you will, towards a embryo, and there's some research out there that suggests that if you go through one thing, like whether it be a salamander, and then it turns into a frog per se.
Well, it's a well-known experiment. It's being done with frogs and
it's repeatable.
And lizards.
Right.
Absolutely, it's repeatable, and chickens and
ducks,
and things like that. So this is not science fiction. This is real stuff.
In an instant, if you can imagine a light source that we may not be able to perceive with the spectrum of our eyes comes through the universe at a certain given time on a cyclical manner, then why is it so impossible for us to fathom that there's going to be a leap in evolution within the next, I think we're going through it now. I think everybody's genetics are changing as we speak. The different disciplines and the different people that I have on the show are specifically saying a change. There's so much change, and I really think there's a transition involved in this whole thing. And I think humanity has a big part to play in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the awakening or the reactivation of our pineal gland has a lot to do with that. And just to reiterate, the pineal gland is really a receptor. It's a receiver of frequency. It's a receptor of frequency. And you still get people out there that tell you wonderful things with a beer in their hand, saying if I can't see it and I can't touch it, it doesn't exist. They talk rubbish like that. At which point you must send them back to school.
Right.
Because that's not how it works.
Ironically, you said about a person with a beer in their hand, and they say that, but whenever you have illusions because of beer, they call alcohol spirits, because you can physically, I think it kicks on your pineal gland in some manner that causes you to perceive in such a way that you normally wouldn't be able to see.
Look, all ancient civilizations have the tradition of going into trances, using hallucinogenic drugs to get into trances. And ayahuasca is a big thing now. It's taken the world by storm, and people go to Brazil and they do these shamanic things, and they climb the Access Mundi.
Yeah, but that should be illegal, Michael.
Oh, yeah. Like all natural products that are out there, right? But we must only legalize synthetically created drugs by pharmaceutical companies. Right. Everything else that grows in nature should be illegal. Absolutely. But what's interesting, actually, just to come back to that, is really interesting, is the discovery we've made, for example, with Willem de Swart, the work that I've been doing with him, is the whole nature of reality, where you've got numbers and numeric structures and numeric science, which is what I like to call it, which we start to explain this weird nature of reality that quantum physicists tell you is actually not there, right?
Right.
And when you look at hallucinogenic drugs, which allow you to go from the physical world into this other realm, the structure of the molecules is always a hexagon next to a pentagon. And in numeric science, the hexagon represents a three-dimensional universe as we can see it and imagine it. And the 5, the pentagon, is actually what we call the divine number, where 1.618 or the 5 factor comes from as well, which is the number by, or the spiral by which all things in nature and the universe seem to arrange itself. The 5 factor. So the 5 factor, or 1.618, comes from a pentagon, which is then linked to the divine creation.
Right. So, and there's also an intermixing here of what you can do with, like, the frequency of something, the number that's associated with it, and the shape of ancient geometry, if you will. Like, certain frequencies will cast a certain symbol, if you will. And I don't know if you get into that at your talk at all, but some of the researchers that I've read up on can prove this by virtue of sending a frequency towards the water and changing it in a certain way. So, I mean, there's so much that's related in the whole dynamics of what we're talking about.
Yeah, frequency is pretty much the answer, and that's what our research is pointing towards. That frequency, within frequency lies the answer to everything.
Awesome. Okay, so once again, we're going to put the number out there for any questions. And the number for Blog Talk is 718-664-9323. And Dan, what's the local number?
Local number is 814, that's the area code, 342-0479.
Awesome. If you guys have any questions out there for Michael that's come the whole way from Southern Africa, it would be a good time to do it now while he's sitting here in our local station here at Phillipsburg, 1260 WPHB Country Route. Okay, so again, Mike will be at Damon's Restaurant to speak further of all the stuff we're talking about tonight in detail, of course. And we're just giving you some teasers of what he's found, and it's really interesting. I mean, we've had a little chat on the way from New York City to here within the past, 5 hours or so?
A little chat, your voice is raspy.
Oh, my gosh. Can you tell? Yeah, I feel bad for Michael's girlfriend, actually, because, I think she's in the back going, oh, my God, please, shut up. But anyway, Damon's Restaurant, State College tomorrow on Saturday from 6 to 9 p.m. And if you want to purchase tickets, you can call Damon's Restaurant right now, or stop in and pick them up, or you can actually purchase them at the door, if there's any left. Hopefully there are.
I can't wait.
You going?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I told you 3 weeks ago I was coming.
I know, but you know what? Lots of people say they're going to go, and there's a lot of people that have actually called me and emailed me and said, hey, I want to go to this. This is really interesting stuff. It's cutting edge, and it's new. It's fresh. I mean, nobody else is really doing this, and if they are, I mean, they're not hailing from Southern Africa. So this is awesome stuff. It's amazing. Can you imagine that he's one of my first guests on the show?
He was.
And here he is sitting right across from me. I picked him up.
Gee, what a journey. Let me see what. Because, we had to come in the water car all the way across the Atlantic. And halfway
Yes,
across
that's the new technology. Yeah. He's working on the water car.
The water car?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we ran out of petrol halfway across the Atlantic, and we had to start to paddle.
Yeah, but then you created the new water buggy. Yeah, water car.
Anyway, okay, enough of that rubbish. But the thing is that it seems, if for people that know their Bible, you'll realize that it is if you start looking below the surface of just the storylines in the Bible, you realize that it's encoded with incredible amounts of knowledge and information of scientific, ancient knowledge of scientific science and physics and what today would be called sacred geometry. Now, some people, when you say sacred geometry, send shivers up their spine. Oh, some wishy-washy, religious stuff, voodoo.
Right.
Well, again, just to correct things for you, just straighten the way you think. The word sacred in Greek means fixed geometry. So we're dealing with the laws of nature, as nature has fixed it in the universe.
Right. as well as law of attraction. And the way if you learn about energy and you consider that energy is all around us, even if we perceive it as three-dimensional, hard, physicalness, if you can come to the thought process of energy, then you can think of, thought is energy too. So thought becomes reality. You can manifest pretty much anything right before your eyes. But the only reason you can't do it like right here, right now, this second, is because you've been told you can't do that. And you have a belief system that prevents that. So once you can step out of that paradigm and into a new one, and I really believe you step into a new awareness or a reality, if you will, and therefore you raise in your awareness, you raise in your dimensions that you can now live in, if you will. But, this all sounds woo-woo and all that kind of stuff, but it's all interrelated, and one thing leads to another thing with all kind of other questions. And to speak of all of this, you have to have a broad range of knowledge in various different disciplines, and that's why I enjoy listening to Michael, because he can touch on just a little bit of everything. So I really think that tomorrow's lecture is going to be pretty spectacular.
Well, what you spoke about there, Joe, is clearly defined and shown in what's known probably one of the most important experiments done in physics in the last 100 years, and that's the double slit experiment.
Right.
Okay, and there we very clearly show that matter can exist as a particle.
Right.
But this is where it can also confuse you and completely confuse you for the rest of your life, because what science has done, again, it's so limited in its attempts to explain the laws of nature that we use the wrong words and possibly mess up the mind of a young student for the rest of their life, where they don't understand what exactly it is you're trying to say.
Right.
So we say that matter can exist in a particle, as a particle or a wave.
Right.
Well, the moment you say wave, you've confused somebody for the rest of their life.
Right.
Pretty much, because they see waves on the ocean and waves on a pond and two-dimensional waves on an oscillator and things like that, and that's not what it is at all.
It's because in three-dimensional thought, you think in a linear fashion or a limiting view, whereas if you can step outside of that, just what you're saying, time, space, and space-time makes sense. It's difficult to wrap your head around the first few times you read it or learn about it, but then once you research it a little bit further and realize that everything is energy around us, and therefore everything is a frequency, then, well, I don't want to get into too much of this because I don't want to give away what's going on tomorrow, what you're talking about, but it all makes sense once you hear this lecture tomorrow.
Yeah, well, look, the time-space thing, double slit experiment, is one of I just love talking about that, because it allows people to really let their imagination go. And what is nice about that is that we're dealing with hardcore physics.
Right.
And science. It's not some wishy-washy stuff. And,
right.
And on that same subject, for people that still think that what you said, the laws of attraction and that is some mumbo-jumbo stuff, it's not. This is all hardcore physics and scientific experiments that have been shown and proven over and over. So, and some people still think that, psychic ability is some mumbo-jumbo. It's not true. It's being shown to be a scientifically proven ability.
As far as they use it in the military for such things as remote viewing.
Absolutely. I mean, in the war, the Russians are spying on the Americans, and the Americans are spying on the Germans, and the Germans are spying on the Japanese, all with remote viewing and psychic ability, and they vaults of that information available.
Right.
So that's just one example of it.
Right.
Well, what I like to do is use a scientific term to dispel any doubt in people's minds, and that is, if you have one psychic tell you something about a specific bit of, some information about something, it's interesting. And then the next psychic tells you the same thing about a specific thing. I'm talking about, for example, Adam's Calendar, which is what we call the oldest man-made structure on Earth in South Africa. And it's a calendar site, a monolithic structure made out of stone, and it's a calendar, and it still works today. And it's about 280,000 years old. So that's our current conclusion. And
how old is humanity supposed to be?
Well, there's some people that are deeply religious will tell you we're not older than 6,000 years.
Right, and you're talking how much? 280,000.
280,000 years, yeah.
Right.
I was actually told by one of those folks that said 6,000 years old that the reason why the dinosaurs are under so many layers is because the first rain washed all the sediment down off the mountains and on top of the dinosaurs, and they were animals that did not make it out of the ark.
Well, that's an interesting thought. It's great that, you can use that and don't use it, whatever.
Right.
But the information that we got and the evidence that we have takes us back a long time, takes us back about 300,000 years. In fact, I can tell you my shock and horror when I went to Stonehenge in May, when I did my talk in Glastonbury in England, which is close to where the crop circles appear, which is another interesting phenomenon.
Right.
And for those people that are still wondering what crop circles are, those are really messages from advanced beings that are teaching us, giving us very encoded, deeply encoded messages in sacred geometry. And
right.
if you
That's how they
studying,
can communicate.
Exactly.
And plus they're planting a seed, maybe.
Yeah, it's phenomenal information that they're sharing with us. And all of it comes back to some of the stuff I'm doing with Willem de Swart, actually decoding the so-called, what we call the numeric prison grid that we see in the universe. Again, quantum physics tells us that it's not really there. It's just a field of potential, and the observer determines what he's going to observe. And, if you don't believe that, then go and fight it out with a quantum physicist.
It's like, yeah, exactly. Well, here's another thing. What about the near-death experiences that people have? They get a glimpse of the other side, and they come back and they tell you exactly what they see, what they've been told. How can you explain that all of a sudden, somebody that could never play a musical instrument can now play the piano quite fluently, or they have all this information and this trigonometry, and they never had that before. And they tell you, this is what's been told to me, this is what we can expect. And this is years and years of research also. Lots of MDs have done research into this, that the patients have told their story, and they documented it, and there's a common theme with a lot of this stuff.
I'll mention Stonehenge, and the things that I'm going to show people tomorrow in my presentation is that these ancient civilizations in southern Africa, had an advanced knowledge of technology and sound frequency, and they used sound frequency to generate energy in a form that we don't yet understand today, and yet the Bible talks about the creation of the universe from the Word of God. So sound was the creative force that God used to create the universe. We get the same thing in Buddhism and Hinduism. That's the the sound frequency as a primordial creative source. And you suddenly see how all these ancient civilizations and religion converge and tell you the same story. And what's fascinating is that we find this evidence in these ancient civilizations in southern Africa. They used sound as a source of energy. And then you go to Stonehenge and they tell you that the stones at Stonehenge were chosen for their acoustic properties. And certainly when I heard that, I went, hold on, but this is the same stuff that we discovered in South Africa, that the stones were chosen for their acoustic properties, which means that Stonehenge must be an energy-generating device. And if that is the case, then the stones certainly cannot be blemished or cracked or broken. So whoever hauled the stones from 300 miles away to where they are today, and it's an impressive structure, really is.
And how did they do that?
Well, you can levitate things with sound.
Right.
The Tibetan monks have been doing it for thousands of years and are still doing it today. And this is not some mumbo jumbo stuff. It's well documented and well, experienced by many Westerners. It remains a tightly guarded secret by them, you must add, so they don't like to share that with outsiders, but it's been well documented by some outsiders. But anyway, so once you know that the Stonehenge, the giant 40 tons upright stones were chosen for their acoustic properties, suddenly you go bing, and the alarm bells should start ringing very, very loudly. And you realize that for them to be acoustic devices, they cannot have blemishes or be cracked, otherwise they wouldn't work. And then you start looking at the cracks and the breaks in these stones, and you realize that the erosion around those cracks is so severe that it has to be hundreds of thousands of years old. And that's a simple question you can ask any geologist, and they'll give you those answers, and especially the lintels. And I've got some spectacular photographs because we were able to go inside Stonehenge, and we actually spent an hour inside there with a large group of scientists and researchers. And I noticed that some of the lintels across the stones at the top have severe cracks through them. Now, even if you don't believe the fact that the upright stones should not be cracked, you can, okay, let's set that aside. But if you're a builder or an architect, you're certainly not going to use the lintels on top with cracks in them. So when you see a lintel with a crack in it, you realize that the crack must have occurred after it was put in place. And then you look at the erosion around the crack, and that erosion in that very hard sarsen stone will take 500,000 years for that kind of erosion to happen. So people that tell you Stonehenge is a few thousand BC, they're dreaming, they're on drugs or something. This place it's really old, very old.
So what you're saying is that Stonehenge, the frequencies won't work there anymore because they're cracked and everything.
No, I guess they're still working. But I'm just using that as an example of how old the site is. Okay. Not the fact that, look, it was originally an energy generating device, just like the stone circles in South Africa, and I'm going to show you the proof of that when you come. Just like the Great Pyramid, and the pyramids are energy generating devices. And then you start realizing how some of these numbers play a very important role. The number 22 becomes a very important number in all of this stuff.
And then this becomes even more monumental in other disciplines such as medicine and building and all kinds of other things like the free energy. And I mean, there's so many avenues that this breaks into. Once you expose one little thing or one concept, it's just amazing, how this is all going to unfold once this becomes factual and gets out to the population.
Well, I mean, look, Einstein's theory of relativity, EMC squared. I'm not sure if Einstein knew what he actually did. I actually think he did know exactly what he did, but maybe he was too scared to really tell the world what he was thinking, or maybe he did tell the world, but that information hasn't really been released.
Right.
So it's difficult to know because the controlling bodies out there really like to filter through the information they let us have, and that's so blatantly obvious by now. But that whole EMC square thing is fascinating because it almost describes the twin slit experiment, the double slit experiment. If you take the equal sign and you turn it upside down, or if you turn it upright, you got the double slits.
Yeah.
You got energy going through,
right? And
on the other side it becomes mass.
Right.
So it's a double slit experiment.
Isn't that amazing?
Wave particle. Okay.
It's almost like Nostradamus, how he knew certain things, but he decoded them and all that kind of stuff, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this is the kind of stuff I'm working on with Willem de Swart, and see when we eventually release our book called Secret Numbers of God, it's going to freak people out because it makes things so simple. It just explains everything so easily that it just boggles your mind. And I just wish Einstein was alive and here today. He would kiss Willem de Swart. He would be a big fan.
Awesome. Well, you know what? You never know. It could be the reincarnation of.
Yeah, it's quite possible.
So, but basically, Michael, you really respect that man, and really respect his thought and his intelligence. Obviously.
Yeah, look, there's been so many great minds and so much great work that's been put out there, but I think often it's been misunderstood. And the closer we get to understanding how this frequency thing is just taking over and becoming the central, I suppose, thought in all of civilization, in all of this reality that we find ourselves in. Frequency within that seems to be the answers to everything.
Right. And if you didn't even have the concept of frequency or energy that has the possibility, you really wouldn't even think about it really. But now that that's exposed, just that concept and that thought, now people can ponder all kind of different variations of, if you can create energy with this, or you can, have 0 point energy, and you could run your house, you could run your car. I mean, there's so many different things that once you decode this energy via frequency, and I'm not quite sure how this is going to be done, whether you have to have a tool to do it, but I guess you can get into all that if, the
Well, listen, there's frequency all around us. It comes to us from space.
But how do you harness
There's
it?
ambient frequency all around us.
Right.
There's frequency. It comes out of planet Earth all the time. It's unstoppable.
Right.
That's what Nikola Tesla and people like John Keeley said to us. The Earth rings like a bell.
Right.
And if you know how to tap into that frequency and the sound vibration, you can use that energy anywhere and for any kind of purpose. And just to whet the appetite of those that are listening, 13.56 megahertz will make neon lights glow. Neon tube lights. To take a neon tube light, bring it, expose it to 13.56 megahertz, they will glow.
Without touching any kind of metal or anything?
No wires, nothing. Pick it up in your hand, bring it, expose it to 13.56 megahertz, it'll glow. Okay, it'll light up. 50 hertz will boil water.
Right.
And if you don't believe me, go out to YouTube and just type in Peter Davey or boiling water or sonic boiler. Sonic boiler. This is a Kiwi, a New Zealand musician in 1940 lodged a patent how he discovered how to boil water with 50 hertz frequency. And so these things are all around us, but we've just been so conditioned to believe that electricity is energy and it kills you if you misuse it, and it's difficult to make and harness, and it costs money to get from A to B, and that's why we have to pay so much money for it. Well, that's all rubbish. That's just a control mechanism, which, Nikola Tesla was denied from giving us free energy in 1902 already.
Right. And, one of the things that just clicked in my brain here is thinking back of, in a commercial maybe, a soprano singing to such a high pitch that she breaks glasses or windows. And that frequency that she's emitting from her own vocal cords can,
shatter a glass.
Right.
I mean, that's heavyweight energy.
Right.
And it comes to vibrational resonance, harmonic frequency, harmonic resonance.
Right.
They did that on MythBusters, too.
Did that happen?
Yeah, no, they put a speaker up there. They couldn't find a real person, like an actual person, without an amplifier with it.
Right.
But they were still able to do it. I mean, so with vibrations, they were able to break the...
There it is, right there. So, I mean, there's all kind of applications that you could think of after just discussing just a few concepts here within the past, 45 minutes to an hour. And you're going to have a 3-hour show tomorrow night, Damon's Restaurant, State College, from 6 to 9 p.m. You can either get your tickets there at Damon's, or you could log on to Michael's website at www.slavespecies.com. So, how much time do we have left there, Dan? 5 minutes. Okay. Well, we have 5 minutes here, so I guess we're going to close the show. But what I'd like to do is thank you for being on the show, Michael. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's so awesome to have you live here in the studio. Now, you have about, almost 5 minutes here. Is there anything that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Well, I guess my mantra now that I've started, telling everybody where I go is keep exploring, because truth is stranger than fiction. The discoveries we're making are far, far more stranger than any kind of history book you've ever read. And it will redefine what we believe about our human origins, our human history. There's no doubt about that. The physical evidence is there, the proof is there, and it's a history of the world that we have not seen before. It goes back further in time than we've ever possibly imagined. Most mainstream, textbooks and academics are not aware of this. You can't read about this anywhere because it doesn't exist anywhere other than the research that we've put out on the internet, the research that we're finding on a daily basis. And as we get into it, this has been about a 7-year-long process, and on a daily basis now, the information and the research is speeding up so dramatically that it's almost difficult to contain it. And hopefully those that come and view my presentation will get that excitement and the sense of what it is that we're uncovering here. It's really quite incredible.
Michael Tellinger, all the way from South Africa, Phillipsburg, Pennsylvania. So, what can you tell the listeners to expect? Maybe just a little taste of tomorrow's lecture at Damon's Restaurant in State College.
Well, I think a point of departure would be to start by explaining that what we believe to be human history and the history of our planet is of vast difference to what most people have been taught, what we've been taught in our history books at school and at university. When you start researching the origins of humankind and the history, which you could probably call the hidden history of our planet and humanity, very quickly you realize that things are not as they seem, and that there's a lot of information that for some reason has been kept out of history books and mainstream of information. And you start finding and discovering things that are quite shocking at first, and eventually you realize that this body of information that is missing from our history books grows and grows and grows to the point that is a lot bigger and a lot more complex than you ever possibly imagined. And it just really shouts and screams at you for more investigation and keeping an open mind at all time, because there are times when you come across interesting information that really goes and flies against everything, every ounce of sanity or
we're going to do that now. I know we're a little bit late, but we can open up the phone lines now. If you have any questions for Michael, or if you have any thoughts you would like addressed, give us a call at 1-718-664-9323. And Michael, could you tell the listeners what your website is and what they can expect to see on your website?
Well, the main website is slavespecies.com. And just there you'll find a bit of introduction about, what I've been doing, what my main body of work and research is. And then also ZuluPlanet.com, that's Z-U-L-U or Z-U-L-U, as you would call it, .com, ZuluPlanet.com. And really what I deal with is my latest book called Temples of the African Gods, which presents the physical evidence of this vanished civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa up to about 300,000 years ago, or starting around 300,000 years ago. And this is where it really becomes interesting, because when you start mentioning those kind of terms and those kind of periods, most archaeologists and historians just, go, what are you talking about? Well, that's exactly what it is. We're now finally finding the physical proof and the physical evidence that many authors and many researchers have been writing about and alluding to for decades about this ancient civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa, mining gold. And we now finally have the physical proof to substantiate and give credibility to many of the authors, especially people like Zechariah Sitchin, obviously the author of, he's written about 12 books now that talk about mostly the translations of the Sumerian tablets and demystifying much of so-called mythology that until now has been thought just talk about this so-called event, this deluge of a flood that the Sumerian tablets describe very, very clearly. And so this vanished civilization, the tip of southern Africa, shows us and has presented us with startling evidence that all the other civilizations actually got their knowledge from this vanished civilization down in the south of Africa.
So what is your take on the thought of Atlantis?
Well, Atlantis is a very interesting thing. The subject of Atlantis is a very interesting subject that is many people have studied for long periods of time. And just like every other so-called mythological story, Atlantis is proving to be more and more of a real historic event. And at this point, I must tell your listeners that just redefine the word mythology, because this is where a lot of people get confused. The original meaning of the Greek word mythos, where the word mythology comes from, the original meaning actually means spoken words, written words of antiquity that were sworn to be accurate and true by priests and kings. So you see very quickly that the meaning we ascribe to the word mythology today is the complete antithesis of its original meaning. it certainly did not mean imaginary or fairy tale. And when you read ancient scripts of the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Romans and Phoenicians, they certainly didn't speak about mythological gods. They speak about their gods. And the body of evidence that we get from the Sumerians to be imaginary or mystical or something like that, but it's actually none of that. And the evidence we're finding is the physical proof for this vanished civilization that lived at the southern tip of Africa, mining gold as far back as 300,000 years ago.
Okay. So if you're calling through Blog Talk, the number to call in is 1-718-664-9323. Locally, the number is area code 814-342-0479. If you have any questions for Michael, please call in. In the meantime, Michael, I'm sure there's some listeners out there that have a question such as, how are findings in South Africa relevant to the rest of the world?
Well, that's a very important question. And the immediate answer to that is that forever, people around the world have been told that nothing of any substance or consequences ever come out of Southern Africa. Well, now we're discovering that nothing can be further from the truth. That, in fact, the evidence that we've now been presented with, that we've discovered, shows us very clearly that every other ancient civilization, and I mean all the so-called great northern hemisphere civilizations like the Egyptians and the Sumerians, which we've been told was the first civilization on Earth. The Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Mayas, the Incas, all of them have got their roots and originally started out in Southern Africa. That seems to be the prototype civilization that predates all these other civilizations by many, many thousands of years, and go back to before the flood, what we refer to as the biblical flood, which most, if not all, ancient logic in your body and things that we've been told is so, that are not necessarily so. And it gets really interesting.
So do you feel that science, religion, and technology are now finally going to come together to solve some of the mysteries that have eluded much of our current civilization for decades?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's really interesting to see how science, especially the field of quantum physics, is pointing very strongly towards the direction of a divine creator, of a divine being, of God, call it whatever you want, and is actually suddenly providing very strong support for such an existence, while science for many decades has been used as cold-hearted, attack on religious belief systems and the existence of some sort of divine intelligence or God. It's, again, I'm always very careful how I say these things, because when you say the word God, in some circles it's interpreted one way, and in other circles it's interpreted a different way. But science and religion and ancient civilizations suddenly start merging, and this is what I found, is that this research that you start doing, or you find when you start researching origins of humankind from ancient civilizations, these lines start to cross, and they start to blur right across, and this is really very exciting. And the discoveries we've been making that you mentioned of these ancient civilizations in Southern Africa begin to answer many of these missing years and missing epochs in human history.
Wonderful. Okay, it's almost 20 till 5, and typically halfway around the hour there we take some callers. So